I want to thank you sincerely for attending this special session. For the next hour, we will remember the technical accomplishments and unique character of our friend and colleague, Dr. Mike Netherland. While his family and friends all miss Mike terribly since his passing last October, we here recall with deep joy our collaboration and our friendship. Mike had unrivaled passion for the science and practice of aquatic plant management. He trained under some of our discipline's most productive scientists. He worked in government research, academia, and private industry, providing him a great perspective on partnership and joint success. He studied all aspects of aquatic plant management, including diverse collaborations examining basic biology, ecology, and genetics. He published high-impact applied studies, including numerous papers in the Journal of Aquatic Plant Management. He was a phenomenal technical resource to public agencies and private management firms around the U.S. and the world. His support and related research led to adoption of many new herbicide use patterns that fundamentally improved control practices in all types of aquatic systems. He directly advised graduate students at the University of Florida, participated in numerous other student advisory committees around the country, and was a mentor for countless young scientists, including me and several of us speaking here this morning. He served as both president for APMS and for Florida APMS. Beyond and above all of that, he was son, husband, father, and great friend. Today, a small group representing his many friends and colleagues will take on the challenge of summarizing Mike's career and unparalleled contributions. For those who knew Mike, this will be an emotional hour, but one that helps us appreciate even more what he accomplished and recall the great memories of knowing and working with him. For those here who did not know Dr. Netherland, we hope that you capture a good sense of Mike's scientific contributions and also his personality. For all here, please thoughtfully consider how Mike's example may call you to greater commitment to this discipline, to our societies, and to the critical work we do to improve our aquatic resources. We will end this morning with a special announcement in recognition of Mike's contributions to APMS.
I'm Jay Farrell. I'm with the Center for Aquatic and Invasive Plants at the University of Florida, and I had the unique opportunity of working with Mike on a daily basis for about the first 2 years that I was there at the center. And in that time, Mike was so patient with me. I would go in and ask simplistic questions, and then he would answer. Then I would come back 2 weeks later and ask the same simplistic question again, and he would kindly give me the same answer each time, trying to get me to where I needed to be. But because of that, I find myself quoting Mike almost on a daily basis now. So some people use Mark Twain, other people use Lou Holtz, I use Mike Netherland. So the question that I've been asking myself is, why was Mike so impactful? What did he do that is so different? And why are we having a session like this? Because it's so unique. Because when you look at what Mike has done, he has impacted us in a way that is not normal. So I approached Mark Heilman and I said, you know, Mark, as program chair, I think it would be helpful to go back and review a lot of the things that Mike has done and just see how he has moved us forward. So when you look at science, science is a very iterative process. There are small changes. We just move little slivers ahead, and we take all of that and we stack it all together, and after many, many years and several millions of dollars of research, we now have enough information to move ahead. But every once in a while, you have a scientist that is not iterative. They take steps that are very large. They take leaps ahead. And Mike was a big leap scientist. And one of the reasons he was a big leap scientist is because he would always ask questions that we always knew the answer to. So I would go to Mike and say, well, it's clear that we can't do this because of this reason. Everybody knows that, ... And Mike would say, are you sure we know that? Everybody says that, but are you sure we know that? And that is what Mike would do. He would ask questions that we all know the answers to, but that we don't have data for. As scientists, we want to know where the walls are. We want to know, we want to stay right in the middle where it's safe, because we don't want to waste our time answering questions that we know the answer to. But Mike was willing to take those risks. He would ask those questions that we all know the answer to, but have never had any data on. And because of that, he would find discoveries that would move us way ahead, because he was doing things no one else was willing to ask. He would also work with just about anybody to get the skill set that he needed to answer his questions. So those are the things Mike did. Those are the things that moved us ahead. So Mark, I really thank you for putting together this big list of speakers. It's been said a lot, and I've heard a number of people say, it's going to be a long time before someone comes in and fills Mike's shoes. And I would suggest to you that no one is ever going to fill Mike's shoes. We have a lot of new talent that is coming on. There's a lot of new researchers, both in industry as well as at the universities. And I'm very excited about where this society is going, where this field of study is going in the next 15 to 20 years. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a lot of energy in this room. But Mike was a talent that came along less than once in a generation. No one will ever fill Mike's shoes. But I think we can do honor to his memory. I think we can pick up where he left off and do a lot of good work. Thank you, speakers, for being willing to come in, share your experiences with him, and really highlight what he has done for us and for our industry. Thank you.
I'm Carol Lemby. I'm retired from Purdue University, and I was Mike's advisor for his master's degree. And so I'm going to share some of my observations about that process and also some personal observations about his character. And I say that loosely, character. He was a character. Not only was he a genius, he was a character. I also would like to thank the organizers of this session. I know that it means or will mean a lot to Mike's family, and I'm so pleased to have been invited to give some remarks. Now, when I got this invitation and wondered how I might start this talk, one word kept popping up in my mind, and that word was serendipity. Now, let me explain. The way that Mike met me, and eventually all of you, was totally unorthodox. As you know, most potential graduate students will have developed a research interest, maybe from coursework, or they have done an undergraduate research project, and then once they decide what they want to do, they'll search the literature or talk to advisors about where they might go to grad school. And then they will communicate with the professor, maybe visit the campus, and then send in their application, and if all goes well, away they go. Well, guess what? Mike did none of those things. So one day in 1986, I was sitting at my desk typing away, and I hear this knock on my door. And so I turn around, and what should I see but a shy, scrawny young man standing there in a very timid voice asking if he could have a moment of my time. Well, okay. So his story, as I understand it, is that he had followed Marcy, his fiancée, to Purdue because Marcy had been given a graduate assistantship in the Department of Computer Science. Quite an achievement for a young woman back in the 80s. Well, he didn't know what he was going to do. He knew that he was interested in aquatics, but he didn't know what area. And so what he had done was to look in the Purdue catalog and circle those professors who worked in aquatic research. And at the time, there were only 3 of us, I believe. Well, luckily, I must have been the first one that he came to visit. Because if he had visited with one of the others, there's a good chance that he might have become a world-famous fisheries biologist rather than a world-famous aquatic plant scientist and manager. And also, luckily, I had just received funding from the Corps of Engineers to study the effects of plant growth regulators on invasive species like milfoil and hydrilla. And even though he knew nothing about aquatic plants, he impressed me enough very quickly. And I gave him the project, and of course, the rest is history. So the definition of serendipity matches perfectly my unexpected encounter with Mike led to very happy and beneficial outcomes, serendipity. Now, there are three things about Mike's career that I can claim. First, I did introduce him to aquatic plant management and science. Secondly, I took him to his first professional meeting, which was in I think the spring of 1987, up in Fort Wayne at the Midwest Aquatic Plant Management Society. And I drove him up, and he was sort of quiet and maybe a little intimidated. Now, it could have been my driving, but I don't think that was it. I think he was pretty concerned about whether or not he would make a good impression at this meeting. But by the time that the meeting was over, he had a pretty good idea that he could fit in with all of you folks. And I think that he was starting to sense that he had found a professional home. And in another year, he went on to win the Graduate Student Presentation Award. Thank you, Jeff, for putting this in the newsletter, because I didn't even know it existed. But he did win that award, and you can see he was a pretty scrawny kid back in those days. The third thing that I guess I can take some claim for is that I helped him publish his first paper. Now, the publication of this paper, which was based on his master's thesis, actually appeared about 3 or 4 years after he graduated, and he may have published a few little insignificant papers with Kurt, but, you know, in that time period. But I'm going to claim number one. This is obviously much more important. Now, it is fortuitous that Mike did come to Indiana and to Purdue specifically, because he made some very important connections with CPRO just 70 miles down the road in the Indianapolis area, and with my connections with the Corps of Engineers, because he ended up, of course, spending the bulk of his career with those two entities, including in addition to the University of Florida. And he fit right in with some of the other folks that I have had the great privilege of mentoring. There are 3 APMS presidents in this slide. But the real reason why I put this slide up here is because I love this picture of Mike, showing him laughing. And he was, you know, he was in form. This was at a much later meeting, of course, and so the contrast between this and the first meeting that he attended is like night and day. He was really with it. I mean, he was just a delight to be with, as most of you know. If Mike felt that he had any obligation to me, he repaid it many times over. But maybe the most memorable was approximately a year before he passed away. And I happened to be spending some time in Orlando with some family, and I managed to escape another day at Disney World because he brought his research boat down, and he took me out on Lake Toho. And this was really something truly joyful for me, because I hadn't been out on the lake. I'd been retired for several years, and I figured that this is probably the last time I will ever get out on the lake. And he took me around to all of these different sites, and I could see the plants out there, and I could grab them, and I could fondle them, and I could identify them. And it was just, I think you can see from my face there, I was just in ecstasy. And interestingly enough, this was only 8 months after my husband had passed away. And so he gave me some joy at a time when I really needed it. I know Mike knew that. So I'll end with this. Mike's sense of humor. He loved to tell stories about other people, as many of you know. And Linda Nelson and I had a chance to spend a weekend with him and Marcy in Orlando about 2 months before he died. About 90% of the time, he was pure Mike, having fun, telling jokes, telling stories, and we were just rolling on the ground in laughter, right? It was so much fun. Of course, the other 10%, he reverted to the realism of what was about to happen to him. So we got to see the sadder and the darker part. But I prefer to remember the happy parts. And he told us a story that he thought was hilarious. And it was at my expense, of course. He claimed that that first day when he knocked on my door, and I was sitting there typing at my desk, and as I turned very slowly in my chair to see who had the nerve to interrupt me, I had my glasses like this, and I glared at him. And he said, "Man, that scared the bejesus out of me." And he said, ever after that, anytime that he saw me in the hallway or in my office and I had my glasses like this, he just would turn around and walk away because he knew it was not a good idea to approach me at that particular moment. So, Mike, I know that, well, first of all, he laughed about that one. He really, really laughed about it. Now, I didn't believe that then, and I don't believe it now. But Mike, I know you're up there. I know you're listening to us. And I'm looking at you over my glasses. And I hope you're getting one heck of a good laugh out of this. Thank you.
I'm Kurt Getzinger with the Corps of Engineers. And Carol, I really appreciate the shout out. Thank you. And he told us that story about the first time he met you many times, so I believe it. Yeah. Many of us were fortunate to have known a very unique and special person, Dr. Mike Netherland. And it was my honor to have had a 30-year relationship with him. Mike was a friend, a colleague, and a mentor to our team members and many others in the field of aquatic plant management. It mattered not to Mike whether you were a researcher, an applicator, a regulator, or a riparian with lakeshore property. He willingly reached out to all levels of our aquatic plant community. Some of you that were influenced by Mike are present at the gathering today, and I appreciate those folks showing up. And while some in this room did not know Mike well, it is likely that you have been or will be influenced by him with respect to aquatic plant management during your career. If you were to review his many publications, it would become evident that Mike had a special gift for understanding the problems and developing the solutions for managing aquatic plants. His legacy will continue to influence those involved in aquatic plant management for many years to come. In addition to his skill as a scientist, Mike was the embodiment of a kind, decent, and responsible individual, and always maintained an optimistic and positive attitude. He loved sports, particularly college basketball. He loved chasing fish. He loved hunting quail and an occasional duck hunt. And I've got some duck hunting stories about Mike, but I'll have to share those at another occasion. Mike was a student of history, too, and he loved to read about topics outside of science. He was also a good husband and father, and the love from his family nourished him in many ways. If I were to illuminate the soul of his professional career, it would include these traits: personality, intelligence, dedication, and background. Some of you may not be aware, but Mike's tenure at ERDIC, and it used to be called the Waterways Experiment Station when Mike first started there, actually occurred in two different phases, separated by distance and time. Here's some of the highlights. In 1988, after earning his master's under Dr. Lemby at Purdue, Mike arrived in Vicksburg to work for the Arctic on our research team. And his Purdue experience set the stage for Mike to excel as a scientist. Young Mike, we called him Young Mike until he was 40, was a natural team player. But his potential to be a leader was evident from early on. As he matured scientifically, many of his ideas and collaborative works led to some of the most innovative aquatic plant control practices developed during the past 25 years. These major lines of research included associating water exchange processes with herbicide concentration and exposure time, or CET relationships, for improved control of submerged weeds. And these were documented through a series of combinations of unique laboratory investigations and complex field evaluations. Now, this CET work led to proving that species-selective control of aquatic plants using herbicides, that is, control the target weed selectively while minimizing injury to the native plants, was indeed possible, even when using broad-spectrum type products. And of course, his groundbreaking discovery of herbicide resistance in hydrilla, the first recorded from an aquatic plant, was also important in his career. So these lines of research essentially provided selective control of the target plants while maintaining all of the desirable attributes of an aquatic community: fish and wildlife habitat, threatened and endangered species issues and habitat, water quality, recreation, property values, and so forth. And these lines of work created a push in the registration for new herbicides for use in aquatic sites. And there are many other sideline avenues and experiments that he pursued throughout his career. These sideline or pilot studies and Mike's keen sense of observation often led to his more substantial technical contributions. As such, the findings of the research contributed in a major way to the technical basis of routine methods of managing aquatic weeds with herbicides that are used today. Results from his work improved the efficacy of herbicides. It opened new use patterns. It ultimately decreased management costs. Clearly, his work had an impact. It is a significant legacy. So following a decade in Vicksburg, Mike completed his PhD via the Corps' long-term training program with the University of Florida. And while he was there, Mike studied under Dr. Haller at the Center of Aquatic Plants in Gainesville. And upon graduation, Mike left the Corps for a while to work for CPRO, where he helped build and lead an international research and development group. Eventually, however, Mike returned to the Corps for the last phase of his Arctic career, where he was stationed in Gainesville at the university at the center for the last 15 years. Now, with that diverse path of rigorous educational mentorship and real-world experiences in academia, in industry, and in government, his pedigree was arguably second to none in the world of aquatic plant management. And we're not likely to see that unique combination of circumstances matched with an individual like Mike for many years to come. During his professional years, Mike perfected his skills as he became the consummate applied scientist. He always developed his research approaches with the public's benefit in mind. He was well published in the open literature, and he spent many hours presenting his work to his colleagues and sponsors with great passion and style. He was able to clearly translate complicated technical issues into readily understandable solutions and recommendations for improving aquatic plant management. And he performed that communication in a manner that scientists, students, managers, regulators, property owners, anglers, private sector and policymakers, indeed the entire stakeholder community, could easily comprehend, could appreciate, and most importantly, could retain. He was particularly fond of mentoring students, and he helped develop a number of young scientists who are currently working in our field. And he liked to tell the students, and I can hear Mike right now, he said, scientists should always be inquisitive, always ask questions, but remember, in order to solve a problem, one must ask the right question. That kind of gets back to some of the things that other folks have been talking about. So for the young investigators out here, I'm going to borrow a phrase from a number of years ago that if you remember in your professional career, it'll help you. Be like Mike. His innovative research continues to influence scientists throughout the country and around the world. Mike was a true collaborator in every sense of the word, both within and outside of the Corps. He was held in the highest regard within his profession, epitomizing the essence of a scientist serving the public. If a role model could be fashioned for young scientists to emulate, it would probably be in the image of Dr. Mike Netherland. Now, many of you know Mike was a longtime and active supporter of our society. He clearly recognized the value of research scientists as viable members in the society, the critical need for scientists to participate in leadership positions in the society, and to publish in the society's peer-reviewed journal. He understood that for the membership to have a positive impact on solving complex problems, the society's mission must have the underpinnings of science. Mike also had a knack of recognizing the potential in everyone involved in our plant management community. He understood that as a small group, we must strive to welcome and include as many people as possible from a variety of viewpoints and backgrounds to overcome the challenges of managing our natural resources. So we intend to keep his legacy alive, to strive to learn from the lessons he taught us, and to draw strength from his courage and indomitable spirit. Mike's wisdom and counsel, his intellect and wit, and humble nature will be greatly missed.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeremy Slade, and I work with Mike at the Center for Aquatic Invasive Plants. I was asked to give a operational strategies, industry perspective on the importance of Mike. You know, a lot of the information that I'm going to talk about today is echoing what you've heard, what we know, but Mike was a special person. I considered him family. He was a mentor to me. But we all know the aquatic plant management industry is unique. For the most part, the information we gather through studies and the scale-up approach of research trials is typically intended to be utilized right away. Of course, there are those that like to study the biology and ecology of weeds. Dr. Madsen. But that information is needed too. We must know how plants and algae, since we're the Aquatic and Algae Management Society now, grow, when they grow, competitive interactions between the species, where they're found, what make them nuisance invasive, and how they change. So what's the best management practices that we can use to manage them appropriately? Today we talk about how instrumental Mike Netherland was. As was said, he always had the foresight, and he was years ahead in answering significant aquatic plant management questions, how he was able to give this information to those managers, researchers, collaborators that needed it, and how they used that information and how they reported back. Because there were probably a lot more failures than there were successes, but we needed that information in order to move forward. We all know the impact that Mike left on the industry, and each of us personally. So today I want to give an industry perspective and talk about working with Mike specifically in his collaborative work with UPL and our primary active ingredient, indithol. So a few weeks ago, I went by the center at UF. Mike's old office was open. And I have to go out there because I'm the treasurer of APMS, and I've got to check the mail. So that's where I pick it up. But his office was open, and over in the corner was a stack of those green research notebooks. And on the notebooks, these were from the early 90s, This was his research that he did to establish this data. This is the data all of us use every day. So written on the outside of the notebooks was indithol and fluoridone, CET, hydrilla, and milfoil work. This is probably some of the most significant information that we have regarding concentration exposure time. And this is actually a concept that I use to talk to customers, researchers, collaborators about how to use products every single day. So this is the groundwork that was laid, and specifically with our company's AI. In my opinion, Mike was one of the top experts, if not the best, in operational aquatic plant management. This is what he did. We all know that. He welcomed the challenges of evaluating herbicides, new and old, on a variety of plant species, mainly various biotypes of hydrilla and milfoil, because those are the superstars. But most recently, it was crested floating heart and Ludwigia hexapedala. Mike also worked to develop and evaluate new technologies, along with Dean Jones, the mapping and the bathymetry with C-maps. There were hours on end that I was in the office when we were manually doing that. That was not fun, so I'm glad that technology has come to where it is. But most recently, bubble barriers, floating booms. He was always trying to improve treatments and look at what's the best way to do this or the next step. Improved dye studies. We've all heard the story of Mike going to Walmart, and you don't go in the middle of the night to get plastic bags, gloves, Clorox wipes, and a shovel whenever you're red. It kind of throws up flags. But he knew how to do that stuff, and that's what's helped this industry today. Again, evaluating the CET relationship to improve treatment efficacy or monitoring. Unfortunately, indithol was one of those molecules Mike worked with and continually tried to find new ways to be used. So Mike's collaboration with UPL, and specifically Gerald Adrian and Cody Gray, helped grow UPL's market share significantly in the last 15 years. The work Mike did with indithol, which is one of the oldest primarily submerged AIs, made it an essential tool today from where we once thought it could be used. 15 to 20 years ago, indithol was thought of as a small-scale tool to treat boat lanes, boat docks, beach areas at relatively high rates. It had a significant use restriction, which was a 3-day fishing restriction. And logistical efficacy selectivity scale questions needed to be answered to be able to use this scale up to use patterns where it was required. In the early 2000s, due to documentation of some fluoridone resistance in Florida, which Mike was also a part of, indithol research was put on the fast track to provide an alternative AI, along with finding new AIs with different mode of actions that could be used to manage hydrilla in large-scale maintenance operations with the FWC. Fortunately, I was able to be part of this work with Mike. I worked at the center with him for 3 years, so we have a lot of stories, good times, bad times. So we answered a lot of these questions, and it took a lot of work and a lot of sampling. And Mike, we just continued to forge on to get those answers and bring out this product where it is. So because of Mike, the necessary questions and roadmap were adequately established to collect the appropriate information and data to support indithol as one of the primary molecules used in Florida's invasive plant management program. And all of this information and similar model was used at the same time to support treatment of monoecious hydrilla in the Northeast. While work was being done in these other two parts of the country, Mike also worked on indithol CETs with Cody Gray and irrigation canals out here in the West. Similar to Florida, once the study showed indithol was very effective against the target weed, sago and horn pondweed, the result of the new use pattern of this new molecule 50 years later. So we continued to develop this molecule. Most all irrigation companies use indithol in their management programs today, which is another milestone for this AI. Because of Mike Netherland, many of you in this room and other collaborators, indithol is now one of the most significant active ingredients in aquatic plant management across the U.S. and outside of the U.S. If it was not for Mike, indithol would probably still be sitting on the shelf collecting dust. So from an industry perspective, personally, I want to thank Mike for all he did to make this active ingredient what it is today. And I wanted to tell one funny story about Mike. We all have that one story but this one was pretty unique. A few years ago, working as an industry, FWC asked people to come in every couple of years and give an update on their use patterns, restrictions, products, and all of that. So it was right before lunch. Some of the previous speakers had gone over on their time. So I'm going through my presentation, and I only have 1 or 2 slides yet left. And I blurt out, "Mike's about to jerk me off." And before I could say the stage, Mike yelled out, "No, I'm not." So at 11:38 that morning, the FWC meeting officially ended for the rest of the day. So thank you for the opportunity to speak during this tribute. I really appreciate it.
One story. I'm sure there's a lot more than one story we can all tell. My name is Tyler Koshnick with C-Pro Corporation, and like Jeremy, I was asked to give kind of an industry perspective on some of the contributions by Mike. And I had the fortunate opportunity to overlap my time with Mike first in industry and then in academics at the University of Florida before I left to go back into industry. And like many in this room, he had a profound impact on me and my career, and just like to highlight a few things from my perspective that from his contributions. So thanks to all those before and after me for your kind words and thoughts, and thanks for the APMS leadership for offering this tribute and to participate. I knew when I agreed to participate in the tribute it would be difficult to find the words. Well, I was wrong. It was actually more difficult than that to try to summarize everything as concisely as possible. Often I find myself chasing thoughts about the adventures, the research, the times together, and cherishing the conversations and the memories. From research turned to sinking trucks in the Sacramento Delta, to greasy cheeseburgers and wetsuits in Michigan, to jet skiing in Mexico, to who knows where to begin in Florida. I find myself recalling conversations and wanting to reach for the phone, but then realizing that no one will answer. Mike is a beloved friend and mentor of more than 20 years. As you have heard, he was an amazing philosopher, and his scientific strength was his vision. As you are hearing, he is one of the most insightful and creative individuals in this field. He aspired to excel, he drove others to do better, and his strength really was in the lab, in designing studies at a miniaturized scale, but his power came from his ability to collaborate, to scale up and translate those learnings to management. Witty and intellectual, even to the very end. For example, in April of 2018, we had a very nice visit at his home. We likely stayed too late because you never knew if it would be the last, and we covered a range of topics. Like Carol said, about 90% had a great time and 10% was reality. The next day when somebody else visited, he had a little incident that required him to visit the doctor. The doc asked him if he had fatigue, drank alcohol, was dehydrated, or had an infection. He said he had to answer yes to at least 3. I'll let you figure out which ones those were. His skills combined with his inherent ability to collaborate and communicate deservedly puts him in the conversation for one of the best ever. He was able to connect the dots, always humble, and never tired of learning. As already partially indicated, Mike's contributions with industry were many. Low-dose selective and large-scale use patterns, pre-emergent uses in aquatics, stewardship of herbicide resistance, concentration exposure times, developing herbicide strengths and applying them to treatment timing or scale, temperature effects, utilizing monitoring and mapping, grass-selective herbicides, in-water treatments for floating weeds, utilization of mapping, and recognition of hybridity, to name a few. But how and why did he choose this path of collaboration? His willingness to partner and connect people can likely be an example for all of us as we look to the future. The perception can often be to frown upon such approach, but Mike embraced it. Reflecting on what made him so successful in partnership was his passion for aquatic plant management, highlighted by his ability, as indicated, to ask questions, create a concept, and turn it into a relevant aspect of management. He was never satisfied with the status quo and never shied from a difficult question. It was never about the accolades, the recognition, or the awards. It was about recognizing needs, having the intellect, and bringing people together with the goal of finding better ways to manage plants. He also worked in private industry, which likely provided a unique and invaluable perspective. He saw the power of what could be achieved by working together, and no matter your affiliation, he approached it the same. Each entity was like a piece to the puzzle, each offering something unique and a value leading to a greater outcome than if done in absence of even one individual, or worse, the risk of doing something that had no meaningful impact. In this small profession, he understood that we couldn't operate in silos and be successful. We have enough pressure from folks on the outside trying to poke holes in our science. He also recognized his limitations and weaknesses and where he needed resources to get something done. A master at asking the right questions, then recognizing and pulling together the right people with a specialized skill and knowledge to advance the basic science, then to apply it back to management in a meaningful fashion. Sometimes simple questions that others may dismiss would lead to new discoveries. Complex challenges that were often multidisciplinary were managed with as much efficiency and impact. Probably the best example of his leadership was on the discovery of herbicide resistance and connecting academics, federal scientists, and others in industry. He developed a standard for how industry should support its products and advocated for continued development. He developed a model for collaboration, recognizing each party, such as regulatory and resource agencies, industry, lake managers, and scientists, all brought significant value. And he brought together the industry in times of need. He raised the standards for our science. Managing aquatics plants is what he loved, and his passion was contagious. He was a role model with unparalleled intellect, dangerously combined with diligence. The creativity, the insight, and the ability to advance our understanding in a meaningful way was so imposing. The strong communication and willingness to interact at all levels is what really distinguished his scientific approach and resulting impact. He will be recognized and remembered as one of the most accomplished peers in aquatic plant management. Innately curious and never satisfied, Mike will define an era. His contributions and friendship will never be forgotten. His legacy will be defined, and believe it will relate to his ability to collaborate and bring people together. He made industry better. He made science better. He made each of us better. As I reflect on what I learned the most from Mike, it is the strength of observation, curiosity, and collaboration. Let his memory be a strong foundation that we can all build from. I leave with this. Ask yourself, what are the 3 things that we can do to improve on creating or enhancing partnerships and scientific collaboration to advance aquatic plant management? That is possibly one of the greatest contributions we can make as we offer our respects. My last visit with him, he gave my son a gift. Sorry. It was his favorite book as a child, and now it has become my son's. I think we all have our own book to cherish, but we shouldn't give up on continuing to co-author the story he started. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Jeff Shart. For the last 28 years of my career, I coordinated aquatic plant management activities in Florida's public lakes and rivers. And just about every water body in Florida contains at least one invasive aquatic plant species, and about half of those waters support hydrilla, water hyacinth, or water lettuce. So there's a great deal of aquatic plant management going on in the state, and we were constantly looking for new and better ways to manage those plants. Well, Mike Netherland and his team first caught our attention in the mid to late 1990s. They were working on developing assays to determine hydrilla susceptibility to fluoridone concentrations in the water, and the response of hydrilla after it had been dosed with fluoridone. Now, prior to that, in Florida, we had been treating a percent of the water body or the amount of hydrilla in the lake, and then reapplying fluoridone if it looked like it needed more to carry it on until the hydrilla died. Well, Mike and his team taught us that, first of all, we need to be treating the volume of the water body, and he gave us the tools or the science to first figure out how much fluoridone was needed in that water body to control hydrilla, to monitor those levels of fluoridone at any time, and to see if and when we needed to do any follow-up treatments. And this is indicative of the kind of research that Mike did throughout his career, is something that managers could immediately apply to operations. Well, some very forward-thinking people stationed Mike at the University of Florida in Gainesville in the early 2000s, and this was at the time when hydrilla resistance to fluoridone had been confirmed. Mike showed up and he said, we need to find out what is the state of the art for large-scale hydrilla management here. So he helped us put together a summit among researchers and managers and stakeholders, and then also published those proceedings. So while Bill Haller and industry were working to screen and bring on new compounds through the registration process, we knew this was going to take many years. So Mike put together another team. At that time included Jeremy Slade and later on Dean Jones, but they were going to study the tools that we already had to see if any of those were applicable for large-scale hydrilla management, because without the fluoridone, we had no tool for that. And they quickly found that, well, up until that point, rather, with endothol, we were using it as a contact herbicide and as a tank mix at rates of up to 4 to 5 parts per million and applying in very tight swaths so that one herbicide crew could apply maybe 12 to 15 acres per day. Well, drawing upon Mike's experience with concentration exposure times and milfoil control, and working with dye studies and dissipation and developing assays for herbicides, they quickly found out that endothol, alcothol, was a pretty mobile compound such that it could be applied to the surface in the concentrate, and in Florida's shallow waters, thoroughly mix all the way to the sediments within just a few hours of application. And that the swaths, if they were moved 100 to 200 feet apart, would also mix throughout that treatment area well within hydrilla's, the effective time, half-life to control hydrilla. So now one airboat could control more than 100 acres a day, and if it was teamed up with a helicopter, we could apply thousands of acres, control thousands of acres in a day's time. So we were back in business very quickly for large-scale hydrilla management. Well, it wasn't just hydrilla and not just endothol and not just in Florida. I looked through the Journal of Aquatic Plant Management, and over the last 29 years, Mike's name shows up as an author or co-author on 49 papers on dozens of plants in at least a dozen states, regions around the country, as well as in Canada, and also on other herbicides as well. Well, when all those new registrations started coming online, again, Mike looked at all the information that was coming out, and there was so much new information out there that he suggested, and we started putting together technical exchange workshops at least once a year and sometimes several per year so that everybody, including researchers, managers, and applicators, were all seeing the same information at the same time, so we all knew how to proceed, not just for hydrilla control, but other invasive plants, as well as selectivity studies on the non-target plants. And that's something that set Mike aside from a lot of other people. He was not only a critical thinker, but he was also an outstanding communicator at any level. He could talk to research scientists, but also with aquatic plant managers, management agencies, and stakeholders who may only have a rudimentary understanding of aquatic plant management. Mike also was not an advocate of any management strategy or control method. He told me on many occasions that his job was to find problems and identify problems and find solutions to those, and it was up to the government entities that I worked for and managers to work with stakeholders to decide if we were going to apply those. So he would give us the tools or the expectations, and it was up to us to convey that to the stakeholders to see if we were going to do the management. So to say that Mike Netherland had a great impact on aquatic plant managers and management across the country would be a gross understatement. Mike and his teams wrote or rewrote the book on aquatic plant management. And we've also heard that a measure of greatness is the level of positive impact that you may have on your area during your time. Well, I think the measure of a great person is somebody who can achieve these great levels without drawing attention to himself. And that was Mike Netherland. So we're here this morning to honor Mike Netherland because we respect him for what he did, but most importantly because we love him and we miss him greatly for who he was. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ryan Thum. I'm a professor at Montana State University. I was asked to talk about Mike's academic collaboration. And certainly Mike's work played a really important role in bringing quantitative data to bear on the initial interest in hybrid Eurasian and northern water milfoil, which is a subject near and dear to my heart. He published more than 5 papers on the subject, and I routinely collaborated and interacted with him on the subject. His academic track record more than speaks for itself. I reckon that Mike had an important impact on every topic that's in this program today and for the past several years, if not every topic, nearly every topic. So it's impossible in a few minutes to try to recount all of Mike's impacts academically on our discipline, and I'm not going to try to do that. It's also impossible in a few minutes to recount his impacts on me professionally or to fully express my appreciation and admiration for him. So I'm just going to share some thoughts and experiences that I think illustrate that, and I'm sure everybody here has their own experiences that they can draw on. Mike was really instrumental in facilitating my ingratiation into the Aquatic Plant Management Society. I entered the field of aquatic plant management science as a new faculty member who was not trained within the discipline. I found my first several conferences intimidating, to be honest. I felt like an outsider in a small and tight-knit community. At my first conference, I was in the hotel restaurant eating dinner by myself, and he came over to me and introduced himself, and I already knew who he was. And I was a little nervous when he came over to talk to me because I was sort of thinking that maybe he was going to grill me on everything that I didn't know, because I didn't know him that well at that point. But instead, he energetically just asked questions and shared thoughts regarding scientific interests that we shared. His candor and authenticity immediately put me at ease. And when I would go to conferences for a few years, I was still, mildly struggled to fit in. And Mike always took time to chat with me, invite me to various outings, and introduce me to others. And as many of you know, those outings at the APMS conferences were very entertaining with Mike, how he could get sometimes on a night on the town at APMS. So at one conference, after coming to the conferences for a few years, I told Mike that I wanted to be more involved in the society, and I have him to thank because within the year he had nominated me for a position on the board of directors, and within a very short time of that, I was much more deeply connected to the society and its membership. And today, I feel really lucky that I actually have this sense of strong belonging within a professional community, and Mike really is the person really responsible for taking time to mentor me and include me in things within the society, and I couldn't be more grateful. In terms of research, his manner of developing, we've heard this from everybody, his manner of developing, conducting, and communicating research has been a real positive model for me. He thoughtfully listened to practitioners, regulators, citizens, and other scientists, and it's clear that he took their experiences to heart when he developed his projects. He conducted his research with the utmost scientific rigor, and he gracefully and thoughtfully communicated his science in his presentations at meetings like this and in his very many publications that he has in the field. He had an open and curious mind. He openly and thoughtfully shared his views and ideas, which is not something that you always get in academia. He listened thoughtfully and considered others' ideas and perspectives. In the few short years that I was fortunate enough to work with him, I was just always really excited to see him at these meetings, and then a couple times when I visited him at University of Florida. Everybody who worked with him knows how much he was willing to selflessly give of his time to help others with their research pursuits. He took time to help me and my students with our research projects. He never took a dime of funding on any of my research projects, even though he was offered. And in fact, when he passed, he actually left money to folks for research projects. So, he really very selflessly gave of his time and energy, which is also rare in academia. He came and visited my lab on his own dime to attend a student of mine's master's thesis defense who he collaborated with. And I visited him twice at the center in Florida. And during one of those visits, he took me out to a bunch of different lakes to sample water milfoil around Gainesville, and it was fun. So his passing obviously leaves a large hole in our society and our discipline, and he can't be replaced, as I think several have pointed out. His memory is certainly a blessing to me and to my laboratory, to our society and our profession. And remembering him will be easy, as people are laughing when they're up here because he just brings a smile to your face. He brought joy and playfulness to science and professionalism. His wit, humor, outright goofiness, and willingness to enjoy life with his colleagues provides a wealth of stories to share and reminisce about at these professional gatherings. I'm sure there'll be a lot of them passed around tonight. And his extensive body of scientific work and mentorship will provide direction and opportunities for generations of aquatic plant scientists and managers. I'm certainly better personally and professionally for the times I was fortunate enough to be around Mike, and I think that's probably true for all of us. Thanks.
Good morning, I'm Rob Richardson with North Carolina State University, and unlike the other speakers, I do have potentially a PowerPoint to go through a little bit with you. Mark asked me to focus on hydrilla, so I thought that this was an appropriate title because really, when you get down to it, Mike did a whole lot of thinking about hydrilla. So if we compare our two belligerents, I've got hydrilla here and Mike on the right. So hydrilla has been called the perfect aquatic weed, and I would call Mike the perfect aquatic weed scientist. If all of us were to sit on our own and build the perfect aquatic weed scientist, it probably wouldn't look anything like Mike. But Mike fit that role perfectly. Hydrilla invaded water bodies across the U.S., and Mike followed close behind. If there was research that needed to be done somewhere, Mike went to that place. He could do mesocosm trials, but if it were more appropriate to do a field trial, he went to California, New York, Michigan, wherever it needed to be done. Hydrilla is typically found in monocultures. If you look at Mike's publication record, almost none of his publications have Mike as a single author. Almost everything that he did was in collaboration with somebody. And when Mike built a collaboration, it wasn't just a one-off collaboration for one project. It typically lasted. And that's why so many of us are here today, because of that close relationship over years that Mike built. Hydrilla developed resistance to evade conventional management, and Mike developed new use patterns to overcome resistance issues. So I think if you look at many of the use patterns in aquatic plant management today, it would be hard to find one that Mike did not have his hands in developing. He was involved with many of those use patterns, not just with hydrilla, but across the country with many other things as well. And of course, one of the things that everybody loved about Mike was his humility. And I remember talking to him one day about weed scientists in general, and some of them who thought very highly of themselves. And Mike threw out an analogy, which I really can't use, but I'll alter it. He said, being the king of aquatic plant management is kind of like being the most humble Notre Dame football fan. It's such a low bar, it really doesn't matter. But that was typical Mike. He had no interest in being called the best or anything like that, but like I said, he really fit the role of the perfect aquatic plant management scientist. So I think if we consider aquatic plant management, all of us as puzzle pieces, and look at it in the big picture, Mike was really this one huge puzzle piece in the middle, and the rest of us just kind of plugged in on the outside. That was really his role in aquatic plant management. He brought everybody in this room together in some way, shape, or form. And, you know, as a tribute to Mike, this is kind of low-hanging fruit, but, you know, do you ever buy a puzzle and there's this one odd thing that looks like it might be a puzzle piece, but it just doesn't fit anywhere, and you put the puzzle together and it's just a leftover scrap that came off of the assembly line, you don't know what to do with it? Well, that's Jay Farrell down here. So for Mike's publication record, you know, I did want to look at that. People said how extensive it is, and it is really extensive. Almost everything Mike published had multiple co-authors. He was a very collaborative researcher. He made everyone around him better, and I'll use one example here. Mike even got Tyler Koshnick a first author publication. That's just a great example of how Mike made other people better. Without Mike, you know, who knows where Tyler would be today. Mike had publications on plant biology, ecology, herbicide efficacy, chemistry, laboratory methods, molecular biology, plant hormones, biological control, probably others, but just looking at it, I mean, here's a real weird one, kochia. Kochia is a major terrestrial weed problem, but because of collaborations that Mike built, you know, he was involved in this research. But I've always loved this article. I mean, this is a review article that Mike published in 1997. So it's a review article. It doesn't really have Mike's independent research in it, but there's some really brilliant pieces of brilliant statements in there that Mike added. And if you get into, I mean, I would recommend, if you have any interest in hydrilla whatsoever, read this. So I pulled out a few things. Here's a few statements. First, monoecious and dioecious biotypes, very different, and therefore management plans will likely require modification as they spread. Again, this is 1997. So if we look out today, monoecious hydrilla is managed very differently than dioecious hydrilla. You know, that statement has held exactly true over time. Second, field sampling of hydrilla propacules is difficult. Long-term management for hydrilla must include tuber sampling. I'm not going to read all the words, but if we look at all monoecious hydrilla eradication programs, almost all of them include tuber sampling today as a measure of success in management. Third, determination of factors that either inhibit or promote tuber generation are important in developing new strategies for long-term control of hydrilla. You know, of everything that Mike tried to wrap his head around, this was probably the one that he really never did address in any way, shape, or form, just because it's such a difficult research design to come up with something for hydrilla insights without disturbing the tuber so that it sprouts on its own. And Mike and I talked about this one for many times, and I know I've never been able to come up with a research design to address this, but still today, I mean, that's a very important consideration. I pulled out 3 things he had in this for future research. Again, this is 1997. Research on factors affecting sprouting of hydrilla tubers in situ or in systems which better simulate in situ conditions. And again, this is something that really needs to be done, but still it's a very challenging research method situation. Second, dioecious tuber sprouting remains quite limited under a vegetative canopy, whereas rapid removal of the canopy by mechanical chemical means greatly stimulates sprouting. So with the renewed interest in Florida with mechanical harvesting, you know, this statement is something that some of our Florida colleagues might want to look at again if more mechanical harvesting is going to be used. And third, this one was another unique one. Vertical position of the tuber within the substrate may play a significant role in its potential for sprouting and survival, and I don't know that this one's really been addressed all that adequately. So finally, you know, one of the highlights of my career was going on a trip to Australia and New Zealand with Mike. You know, if you can picture spending 10 days in a foreign country with Mike, it would probably play out about exactly like you would imagine it. But Mike always liked this picture that I took of him in Australia. I never asked him why he liked this picture so much, but if he was standing beside me and somebody in the audience asked Mike, you know, why of all the pictures from you and Rob in Australia did you like that one the best? I imagine he'd start doing his little head nod and say, because that one doesn't have Dr. Richardson in it.
I appreciate Dr. Richardson going before me and breaking the tie and coat barrier. I'm going to have to read this, folks, honestly. I'm just going to break out crying if I try and speak extemporaneously. It is fitting we honor Mike as a friend and active member of APMS and a researcher in aquatic plant management. I have now known Mike for almost 30 years. Mike was mentored by two graduate advisors who brought very different strengths and lessons to Mike. Mike did his MS degree at Purdue University with Dr. Carol Lemby, where he learned the careful experimental design and high standard of writing that well prepared him for his career. Mike did his PhD at University of Florida with Dr. Bill Haller, who taught him how critical research was for the development of aquatic plant management. One of Mike's strengths was identifying what he could learn from others around him. When he was talking with someone, he'd often comment on what he liked about their research or their application. He was always learning. Now, if you talk with Mike, he would invariably tell a story about you. And then he would quickly follow up with a story about himself to kind of balance things out. And after humiliating me in private, he told me a story about Don Schilling. Don Schilling is a very famous weed scientist who was on his PhD committee. And as has been mentioned, Mike was at University of Florida as part of long-term training. So he was with the Corps of Engineers at the time. And those of you who have a PhD know full well that a PhD means that people can question you about anything, that you are supposedly the master of all knowledge. Those of us with PhDs know that, of course, is not true. But Don said, so you work for the government. Who's your boss? So Mike managed that question pretty well. And the answer is not Kirk Getzinger, by the way. And then he said, well, who's his boss? And so on up, all the way through the Corps of Engineers to the President of the United States. And then he had Mike explain, answer questions about, what the government was like in terms of, what are the branches of government and what do the branches do? So basically, he was quizzed on civics as part of his PhD. And Mike admitted that he didn't answer all those questions with great knowledge. But that's a story he told about himself, and I remembered it and passed that on to PhD students to prepare them for their exams. Mike was a booster of aquatic plant management research, good aquatic plant management research. He knew that our goal of managing invasive aquatic weeds was best served by ongoing basic and applied research. Because of this, he was a big proponent of the APMS Graduate Student Research Grant. Many of you may not recall that the Graduate Student Research Grant actually started as with the Aquatic Ecosystem Restoration Foundation, and they asked APMS to partner with them in that effort. Kirk Getzinger was the first chair of the grant review. After several iterations, APMS took that grant program over and partnered with chapters to continue the program. Mike was instrumental in making that transition. He made sure that the APMS grant program did not expire. Therefore, it is fitting that the Board of APMS has renamed the APMS Graduate Student Research Program in Mike Netherland's honor. So that's our announcement for today. Thank you.